So, hi, I'm Lucy Zarlengo. I am a B2B tech marketer. I've been in the B2B tech space for the length of my career. Most recently, I've been a CMO at some tech companies, both in the HR tech space as well as in social good. Prior to that, I worked at larger organizations such as Dun& and Bradstreet, Thomson Reuters, as well as Dell in marketing roles. Today, John and I are going to chat about AI prompting and best practices. And so, John, why don't you give an introduction to yourself?
Thanks, Lucy. My name is Jonathan Milne, VP of AI Services here at Demandspring, and we're focused on helping B2B marketing leaders generate more revenue.
Great. All right, so AI prompting best practices. I feel like this is a really broad topic. Maybe it might actually be helpful for you to get some context in terms of the work that you do for Demandspring around prompt training. I know, in full transparency, a team that I led most recently went through that 12-week program with you and the team over at Demandspring, and I found it to be hugely beneficial to our organization.
Sure, yeah. So about a year and a half ago, we at Demand Springs kind of realized there was a gap in the market where B2B marketing teams definitely needed to get more awareness and learning and training around prompting. And so we decided to do some deep research and then eventually created a 12-week prompt training course. And some people, I'm trying to ask why 12 weeks? It's not because prompting is overly complicated or overly technical. What we discovered was it's really about change management and helping people kind of build the skill and the habits of getting better at prompting, exploring, trying, and doing new things. And eventually the whole team comes together and kind of gets elevated into this new, what we call an AI first mindset. So it's actually less about prompting and it's more about the mindset around AI. And as you know, Lucy, we talk about the technologies, the trends, the latest research. Things are moving very quickly. Some of the stuff we taught a year and a half ago are pretty much irrelevant today. And then, some of the stuff we'll teach in today will probably be the same thing about, another 12 months will be irrelevant. But, it's like a moving stick. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing in learning how to grow that skill set, right?
Yep. So I was going to ask you the question, like, what makes a good, AI prompt in the context of marketing? But maybe it's best to start at thinking about, like, what is the right mindset that you should go in when you think about how to best use prompting in order to either get, some strategic executional direct or some executional direction and or like strategic insight.
Sure. The most common thing you see, especially with people new to it, is, and especially because we're getting exposed through it through search, a lot of people are still trying to teach or use prompting like they do, like a Google search, right? So the one thing, and that's nothing wrong with that because we will use these tools to do search, and you'll notice that there are some interesting triggers on it. So if you're in Microsoft, for example, you'll see something called web and search. You'll notice in ChatGPT now they'll ask if you want to do deep search. So we have to recognize that there's kind of two sides to these large language models. So you have what I call the brain. So you dig into what it's already trained and knows and what it wants to do, or do you want to use that brain plus, Google calls it ground truthing or the truthing or some term like that. And they're trying to say basically, let's use search and the latest data plus the big brain together to get your answer, right? So the first thing we have to remind ourselves is what is the task we're trying to do? If you're trying to do search, then no problem, off you go, have some fun. But if you're trying to do something a little bit more in depth and stuff like that, there's a couple things that people make mistakes. And one is, Lucy, you know this, is that people try to put everything in the first prompt, right? And it's kind of like if you're working with a student or an intern, do you just download everything onto that intern and walk away? Or would you work with them in a few steps to train them up and get them comfortable doing that task, whatever task you're asking them to do? I kind of think like we train AI or we work with AI in a similar way. I don't know why we keep thinking AI is going to get everything in a single prompt or one, magical prompt. It usually takes us a couple times to work with it to find what we want.
Yep. Yep. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and then you said the kind of the magic word in there. I don't know if you realize that you said the word context. I think it's really, really important as we prompt or we play with AI. Context is everything. My favorite example I often see on a course is someone says, write me a good email or write me a good ad or write me a good something. Well, the funny thing is, what's good? What's good to you? What's good to Lucy and her organization is different to what John thinks is good. What, best practices do I want to employ? And am I using the AIDA principle? Do I want to start with the Simon Sinek principle? Do you want to start with like a hook principle? When we ask AI to do something, it will naturally do something for us and it'll do it at a fairly high skill. So, I always think AI brings us marketers above average, but if you're going to get good at AI, you have to be a better than that, right? And so you got to start asking AI to do something. And then I kind of say, okay, there's two paths you can take. You can, if you don't know what good is, let's work with AI to define what good is and let AI guide us to good. That's good and bad. That has its pluses and minuses. But if you don't know what good is, you might as well start there. So before prompting, let AI guide you. And if you know what you want, then you got to be very contextualized and very strict with AI, saying, hey, this is what I define as, in this example, good. And I push AI to deliver what I want as good. Right. And I find that one more interesting because I find that's what differentiates us. And you can quickly tell people who are differentiating their output. But if you've never done marketing or you're new to marketing, then let's get your skill set up, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, there's this analogy that I've kind of come up with that is helpful to me, which is thinking about, a lot of marketers are familiar with briefs, right? Whether you're developing a creative brief, a strategic brief, whatever it is really taking the step back to think about like, what are you trying to go achieve when you are working with, say, ChatGPT to solve either a question, to think about getting a perspective, to think about like what is all of the information. I love your analogy around the intern that you would sit down and chat with an intern about and say, here is all of the context that's important and helpful as part of this kind of discovery path we're going to go down. And making sure that you can articulate that. I think one of the things that, even when I first started using ChatGPT, and I think with some of the teams that I've worked with, I think people very quickly jump in and just start kind of barraging of questions and not really thinking through how is, the technology actually going to use some of these questions and inputs to then give the right context and kind of the right output. And so you really, I think, have to take a step back and think about like, what is the question I'm really trying to get answered, or what is the advice or guidance or whatever it may be that I'm
Yeah.
looking for, and make sure that you've kind of thought through things, because I think that really then drives the quality of what the output is.
100%. And when you say the word briefs, or I also use the word term sometimes standard operating procedures, so SOPs, right? Those
Right.
are great things we have in marketing teams that we can make sure AI follows or injects into all of our teams, right? And the most common brief I see, Lucy, that we start off with is the brand guidelines.
Right.
Right, every team has brand guidelines, and they want to make sure that this gets them deployed into their prompts, which is great. Tone of voice, they want to make sure it sounds like us, it represents a brand. Absolutely, that's a really good thing we should do. But I'll always tell teams we can push it further. So what I mean by that is when I look at marketing teams and I look at our our guidelines, they're fairly generic, right? They don't give you a lot of good details on how we want to write. And then I also look at us as saying, does our brand actually stay stagnant across all of our marketing channels? And I would challenge all of us to say no. You know what I mean? Like our audience on X or on LinkedIn or on Instagram or TikTok is probably very different, right? So we're going to want to be maybe a little bit more edgy on one brand or one channel versus another one, right? And when we talk about sales or maybe with existing customers versus new customers, our tone might be a little bit more different and stuff like that. So what I love about AI is that I can work with teams or anybody and say, hey, look at here's the standard we started off with, but in an AI world, how would you adopt and push those standards for that? This channel, we want to be maybe a little bit more cheeky and funny. And this one, we want to be a little bit more serious. And when we talk about the product, we want to be less technical and stuff like that. And, there's just different things we can think about deploying versus the standard cookie cutter. We have a brand voice. I'm going to put into AI and say, okay, thou shall use this brand voice for everything. I think is a huge missed opportunity. So you're absolutely right. As we think about briefs, we need to think about how do we start to think differently and leveraging this technology in a way that we never could do before. And with your team, I remember we did some briefs that are very simple. Like every time we deploy a landing page, we want to have these things double checked. Every time
Right.
we do an ad copy, we want to have these things double checked. So, instead of using AI for the creative side, we used it more on the compliance and evaluation of the standard size, right? And that's an awesome, great opportunity, especially for younger marketing team members. Instead of having AI create for them and we want to develop the right skills, we can ask them to develop skills, but then deploy them against some type of standardization or testing to make sure they're meeting the threshold we want, right? So many different ways you can use AI and prompting it as you can discover real quickly.
Yeah, fully agree. And I think, can you talk a little bit about, both prompting guidelines, but as well as creating like prompt libraries? I think, especially that can help scale, I think, the use of AI across teams, and also where necessary, drive some consistency in communication or the outputs as well.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan. Anytime I work with a team and any tool we use, doesn't matter what tool you use, Gemini, Google, Microsoft, ChatGPT, I don't care. What I do ask marketing leaders and teams is that every prompt we create, we share with everybody. Some of us feel like we unlock some type of magical wizard skill, and then are some reactions for some people's, I don't want to share with that because I'm gonna, I don't want Lucy to realize that this is so easy now with this prompt that she's going to fire me or replace me with AI or something like that. I think that's a little bit nonsensical. So
Yeah.
I strongly believe that we always should share what we're learning, right? So whether or not you do something as simple as having a Google Doc or an Excel spreadsheet to share prompts, I don't care. We need to start to share those prompts because I'll never forget one of the groups I was doing training with. They were split into four teams, and one of the teams built a very simple prompt on how to do nomenclature to their file systems for images. So they wanted to make sure every time they stored everything into their digital asset management solution, they'd have a nomenclature set down. And it's funny, the person said it takes me about 5-10 minutes to remember all the little tags and everything I need to do.
Yeah.
It's just a pain in the butt, right? And
Right.
as soon as the person that showed that they're doing this in images, someone else is like, well, hold on a sec. We need to do something similar on campaigns. Could we reuse your prompt for that? And it's like, absolutely,
Yeah.
you wouldn't use the exact same prompt, but the idea behind the prompt, they could take it, extract it, and then quickly create it, right? So it's that very simple example of taking someone's initial idea and pushing it. The other thing you'll find with prompt libraries that no one talks about is the reality is most people will start to push them further, right?
Mm.
So prompts aren't stagnant. And if you have worked with any SaaS tools who are building prompts on top of, wrappers and doing stuff on ChatGPT, like ChatGPT 5 just came out, you'll notice the first thing you have to do as a developer is rewrite all your prompts because the way ChatGPT 5 works versus 4.0 or 4.5 is slightly different. It's so you have to start to then kind of adhere to how the AI is shifting so that your reaction that you get from your prompt shifts. So that is something very frustrating to people who do prompting. They're like, hey, John, my prompt's been working great for the last 6 months. Now it's not working. And I ask, well, what has changed? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm like, are you using the latest model? Like, yes. Well, the latest model is slightly different than the last model, so the AI is not reacting the same. Well, why is that? I don't know why. We just know that every model it slightly shifts where the goalpost is. So you have to advance for that for sure.
What is
But
the best way for marketers to kind of stay on top of the latest and greatest as the models shift? Because I
yeah,
think that's an
that's a
excellent
that's,
point, right?
that's a tough one. Obviously, lots of reading, lots of newsletters out
Yeah.
there, lots of different resources. I definitely I subscribe to about 5 or 10 regular newsletters at least, and then there are some research papers too. There's an organization called arvix.org that publishes the latest research. Those are probably not for the average Joe. They're a little bit further out there, but they're trying to help us kind of understand where the technology is going and stuff like that, and how things are changing. And then, of course, just trial and error, just more and more trial and error. And as you notice online, LinkedIn, Facebook, all these places, more and more people are making the promise that they have the ultimate library. The reality is
Right.
there's no ultimate library. What you really need is libraries to give you ideas to push you outside of, oh, I never thought that was possible. Oh, that's a great idea, right? So it's kind of
Right.
like Google search. I think most people with Google search scratch about 5-10% of Google search. They don't know how to do all kinds of advanced Boolean features and how you can go in deeper and stuff like that, or use it against your own website. And there's all kinds of cool things you can do. That's the same thing prompting, get comfortable first and then push it, right?
Yeah.
And I also laugh, Lucy, we talk about a lot in training. When you get to a certain point with prompting, there is this thing about asking AI to help you, right? So it is kind of scary for some people, but it's getting to the point where if you don't know, ask AI. I'm not saying it's going to give you the best answers, but it's going to at least be another resource to experiment
Mhm.
and play with, right? So, if you asked AI today, what are, 10 cool use cases for marketing, it'll give you some stuff. If you're new, it'll be interesting to you. If you're more advanced, you're say, well, AI is about 10 steps behind.
Right.
It's a good example of why, AI is not going to replace our jobs tomorrow is because we can already tell those who are more advanced already know the limitations and where
Right.
AI can't help us right now. So let's just keep pushing or learning down that path while AI catches up on other paths.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think that this rings true for really kind of any area of marketing is like you really have to make sure that you're doing the due diligence and continuing to educate yourself in other forums outside of just the technology, right? And so even if you bought a new piece of like MarTech software, like of course you're going to get guidance from that vendor. At the same time, you're going to want to talk to some of your peers, go on LinkedIn, kind of do other research. And I think that really rings true here as well of like, make sure that you're keeping up with the latest and greatest, whether it be following people on LinkedIn or Substack or whatever it is, just to make sure that you have an understanding of how the technology is evolving. And something we all should be doing as marketers anyway, just as part of the overall discipline. So I think that's a great point.
Well, we were talking last week, Lucy. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about it. As as a CMO and as someone pushing their team, it's very challenging with AI because obviously it's time consuming. Like
Yeah.
let's not lie to anybody and say that AI is going to be like this tool you magically just start to learn and it saves you all the time. It's constantly moving, it's learning and all that stuff, right? So we have to set aside some to learn. Then AI, I'll call it a double-edged sword. You can leverage it to help improve what you're doing today, or you could start to learn and try to use it to do more things for tomorrow, right? So as a leader, then you got this pressure from your if you're not the CMO, someone maybe higher from you, or your board, or your executive team to do more, right? They're also saying and reading that AI is so magical that you should be doing more with less. So let's talk about reduction of your budget or your people, right? And then you got this whole thing of like trying to learn it. Like, what do leaders do? Like, how do they
Yeah,
manage?
I think this is an area where you really have to be bullish as a leader and really, both make sure that you are prioritizing your team's time in order to carve out time and investment for them to get up to speed and then continue to kind of learn and grow in terms of using AI. In addition to making sure that you are communicating outward in the organization, like this is a critical enabler for us as a team. It's not necessarily because we want to reduce headcount or anything. This is how we are going to continue to produce better marketing, which is going to help the overall business. And so there are some things we're no longer going to continue to support in order to make short time for
Hmm.
learning and development. I think, when we partnered at my last organization with you and the Demandspring team, what we did is we carved out kind of two different times during the week. So there was a Monday or Tuesday training session where you would go through and actually provide guidance and education to the team, a lot of demoing, et cetera. And then later in the week on a Friday, and we did it over kind of general lunchtime, because that seemed to work most for most of the
Yeah.
group, was then doing more of the show and tell, and then folks being able to ask questions, get guidance either from you or even from their peers as the training progressed. I think critical after kind of maybe you go through a more formal training program is continuing to carve out development time for your team. And that's something that I've always tried to do as a leader, whether it be blocking people's calendars on a Friday or like half days or whatever it looks like. And every organization is unique and different, but it's really your job as a senior leader in order to preserve and protect your team's time so that they have time to actually invest in learning and development. I think depending on the size of your organization, you may have some good partnership and collaboration from the HR team and even a dedicated learning and development team who can
Yeah.
help give you tips and tricks too of like how to navigate this specific to your organization. But I think like you just have to have the backbone to really say this is critically important for our team. We are going to carve out this amount of time in order to focus here, and these are some of the things that are going to have to roll off because of it. And I think what's the biggest challenge is there's like it's like you're approaching this hill, so there's like a large investment in time kind of initially, and then that can start to kind of reduce over time as the team gets up to speed.
And you decided to train the entire team, right? And so walk me through your thinking process
Yeah.
there and how you had to negotiate with learning development,
Right.
executives saying everybody's going to now spend their time on this, right? It's a fairly new program at the time. It's a fairly new
Right.
idea.
Right. Interestingly enough, for my organization, I think the full C-suite, was very interested and excited about AI. There wasn't necessarily pushback that we were going to carve off time in order to go do this. I did partner with our head of learning and development to just understand like what are some ways that we can make sure that this program is going to be successful. You brought some of those ideas. I think in addition to that, that leader really gave me some guidance and advice of like how do we bring this learning into things like our all staff meetings, into kind of other monthly and regular forums where we are making sure that we are celebrating successes, et cetera. But I think in terms of training the whole team, I think that this is a skill that is going to be necessary for all levels of marketing in any type of role moving forward. And probably that could be applied to almost kind of, any function in the corporate world. But certainly for marketers, I think, there's more junior team members who potentially can use AI and a lot of, learnings from prompt training in order to better execute against the work that they're doing. And then I think more senior leaders, it's using AI and ChatGPT as an example to help pressure test strategy ideas, to pressure test things that maybe are kind of larger initiatives, that it's not just like, hey, help me like rewrite this email or whatever it is. It's like, hey, how should I think about my messaging strategy in context of our competitors or whatever it may be. So for me, it's really important that I think, there's kind of equity in that training, and just understanding that depending on people's roles as well as their level of experience and seniority, they're going to get something different out of a training program.
Yeah, and let's talk about a little bit. I don't know if you can share too much, but with your team in particular, I remember there's a couple aha moments, right, that we had. So one was in the week we were doing image prompting.
Yeah.
Someone had a really cool aha moment of taking their image and doing a 3D model of it and then 3D printing it, which I thought was super cool, right?
Yeah.
And then there was another aha moment. Someone had created a little chat bot to be a service, like an internal, what was it doing? It was doing like Marketo, like support or something like that for the
Yes.
marketing team, right? And then there was an award for the first person that kind of got their fully supported request out of it, right? So
Yeah.
during the 12 weeks, I could start to see this culture shift. So the 12-week training ends, right? How did your team kind of continue to use prompting, build the ability to review prompts and share them? How did teams change? Like what kept going after the 12 weeks out
Yeah.
of custody?
I think there's a few things. I think one, we had a few people in the organization who were just so excited about the overall program, and I think helped serve as really, kind of advocates for this within the team, and really
Hmm.
helped try and motivate kind of others in the organization. And so specifically, we created like a little mascot for the team.
Yep.
One of our team members actually in marketing ops created that, then 3D printed it, kind of that was like then going to be like a prize, that was kind of an award given to the team. So I think it's like finding those people who are early adopters and also just super excited, and working with them to figure out how can we continue to motivate their peers in the organization. Because it's not always, sometimes as leaders, like tops down, like what I think could be exciting or motivating may be completely different than someone who is potentially like, many 2 decades younger than me, and newer to a marketing team. And so I think it's really finding those early adopters. I think as well, it's just continuing to try and drive excitement and momentum. And that's not just within the marketing team, but with peer organizations. So, one of the women in the team who really was, I think, one of your partners in like helping to roll out this program in marketing. She's an SVP of demand generation. Then started sitting down with peers in the sales organization, sales leaders, rev ops, et cetera, to say, hey, marketing just went through this program. Here's some ways that like you all can leverage this as part of your day to day, and sharing some examples as well. Whether that be like, here's a few prompts that you all can use as you're thinking about, potentially calling up a prospect, or whatever it may be. And so I think then it's not only like isolating the work and kind of engagement within marketing, but bringing it to the rest of the organization, because that helps drive a lot of momentum and excitement as well.
I never asked you this, but you talked about leaders, of course. We need people who are champions, but um, did you have any naysayers behind the scenes that needed to be massaged and pushed along? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I if you remember, the first few calls, I think I was a little horrified, in that. So in my organization, I was able to get centralized learning and development dollars in order to fund the program. I recognize that's not something that is an option everywhere, right?
yeah.
And I think maybe in like the first one or two, there was, I think, a lot of folks who both, you could tell visually on their face, because I think I knew my team pretty well, that they were like,
Yeah.
why are we having to do this?
Yeah.
And then there were others that I think had some really great use cases for their personal lives, like
Oh,
writing
yeah.
haikus or like tooth fairy letters, but like we're having a hard time bridging from, um, you know, both kind of personal application to like, how could I use this in my day to day? So I think the champions helped with that. I think, in one of the meetings, I also had a little bit of a conversation with the team of like, this is an investment in all of you. This is not just like, the CMO has decided we're going to do this program because we're trying to get XYZ efficiency. Because honestly, we didn't even outline those types of goals initially as part of the program. And I really tried to position it of like, this is an investment in you, and this is a critical skill that any of us are going to have to have. And so, we have a dedicated training program. We have an excellent trainer in John. So, kind of, you can choose your path here, but this is something that is going to be expected as part of our work moving forward, that you are going to be leveraging this technology in order to either produce, stronger work, in order to add greater value to the organization, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and I definitely do in the 12 weeks allow people in the first couple of weeks to bring their personal prompting in because I got to get them onto that.
Yes,
I'm not scared of this thing, right? So I
totally.
do recall there was a few fun ones in there, but it's a fun start, right? And it was funny.
Right.
There was now you made me remember there was somebody in particular who was doing stuff a lot more with it on the personal side, and her husband were having comparisons and stuff like that.
Yes.
So it was great to see them. There was
Yes.
somebody doing some wedding planning, I remember.
Yes.
Right. So they were using it for that. It was just kind of great. Like if you start to think about these use cases, it will naturally come to work as well, right? So absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think like thinking about how you can leverage it in your personal life helps extend to like, oh, I could actually use this at work too, right?
Yeah.
So I think, I was talking to my daughter. She was going to go to a concert and she wasn't kind of like a festival. She wasn't familiar with all of the artists. And I was like, why don't you ask ChatGPT to help provide a playlist of like, these are the different songs you should listen to, and then that gave me an idea for like work. So I do think that that's quite relevant. So yeah.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's fun watching. For me, one of the things I love the most about training groups is watching the aha moments happen. And
Yes.
sometimes you can really feel it like in the class, like in that session that week. You can just see people, I kind of say they're on the other side of the fence. They're kind of on one side waiting, maybe thinking, maybe not, using whatever excuse not to pass over. And then once they get over that fence, it's just like, wow, Pandora's box opens up, and then they start asking all these things. And one of the things that's most challenging is then the expectations get a little bit too high. Can
Yep.
AI do this to do that? You're like, okay, hold on now. Great ideas. Let's break those into smaller chunks and see what it can and cannot do, right? So that's
Right.
also one of the challenges of the course for sure.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And I think as like the time progressed as part of that training program, you could see the team sitting down together, even on calls. We were, a remote organization of just like, okay, how could we actually use AI to help solve this problem? At one point we were doing some messaging work, and I think some of the team sat down and we kind of worked together on that. We're sharing some of the prompts, et cetera. So you can actually see like it's exciting to watch the team start to really gain a lot of momentum as part of the program. But one thing that was like actually surprising for me, and I'm interested if you see this with some of your other clients that you work with, is I foolishly went in thinking the maybe earlier career team members would be more comfortable with using AI and ChatGPT and some of the other tools that we trained on with you, just because they're more digital natives, had grown up with more technology. I mean, I can still remember sitting in like the library in college when I signed up for my first email account, So at some point, yeah, for me, it was like, well, they're more comfortable with technology. So this maybe is something that should be maybe seen as like they would be more of the early adopters. And what we actually found was um, they I think struggled a little bit more with like thinking about application and like the critical thinking piece of like how could I actually leverage this technology and apply to my day to day. And it was really, folks who I think had been in marketing a little bit longer in their career, kind of like maybe senior manager, director level and up, who were the ones who I think were quicker to say, this is how I could potentially leverage this in our day to day. And then we either helped their direct reports or helped some of their peers kind of with some of those ideas and examples. So is that something you've seen in other teams, or was that
Yeah.
just my?
No, you're spot on. You're spot on. And the way I describe that is the younger people are more open to experiment with it, right? Because they're early in their career, they know AI, more technology, they're comfortable with change, right? But the older, the more, but it's not just that age. It should be The more you know about something, the
Yeah.
more it's easier for you to leverage AI. So what I mean by that is if you went in, I always use social media as an example because a lot of people aren't very good at it. If you go in and ask AI to create you a social media calendar and a few social media tweets, you go, that's pretty good. You put that someone who's been in social media for 10 years and they're going to kind of gag and almost laugh about how, stereotypical what AI is spewing out because it's
Right.
basically trained on, I always call AI equals average information, right? Or
Right.
average intelligence. So if you're not good at something, it'll average you up, right? So if you're low, it'll average you up. But if you're good at something, if you ask a bad prompt or just ask it to do something basic, it'll bring you down. AI will bring your skill set down. So for a lot of people who are experienced, they know what a good output is. They know what a good, blog site looks like. They know what a good ad is. They know what a good strategy looks like. So they're very quick to either do two things. So if you're older and you used AI for the very first time and you prompted and AI does not give you something good, your reaction, well, this is crap. I'm not going to use this technology, right? That's one reaction. Or the second one is, okay, that's interesting. Now, how do I use this to get myself even better or more skilled, right? And those who go down that path of wanting to use AI to get better and more skilled by asking the right questions, by pushing it, by not always accepting the first answer. I did a prompt this morning. I'll give you a fun use case. I wanted to create a color palette for a SaaS company, right? So I went into AI and I said, okay, here's some of the colors I like. Can you give me something that passes the AAA, the WCAG guidelines, right? So that's that World Accessibility Guidelines. And the first answer, it passed, but not to the AAA standard I wanted, right? So I took the color codes and said, well, it's actually not quite. Can you go back and recalculate it? And AI goes back and says, yeah, I recalculated. You're absolutely right. I'm off. Here's another better green color to use. And so again, is AI hallucinating? Is it wrong? I said, no, it gave me a decent answer,
Right.
but we humans have to validate it and make 100% sure is it exactly what I wanted because I didn't give it very clear instructions on exactly what I wanted. So it gave me an average information, average response. Like, that's good. I validated it, not exactly what I want, pushed it, So is that a bad thing, IA, or is that me, the human, being bad,
Right.
not giving it a good prompt, not going deep enough, right? So it's that balance in chicken and egg. But I always say I'm not a big fan of the whole hallucination. I kind of use it as we ask bad questions or we give it sometimes too much guidelines. So you asked a little bit about frameworks and stuff like that before. There is a challenge of asking AI to do too much stuff in one go, right? So I often say, for example, if you're going to use AI or if you're using an AI tool to help write blog posts for you, behind the scene, there's not one prompt to write your blog post, right? They don't take your idea and be like, okay, magical prompt out. What they're doing is you probably have a prompt that does the outline. Then they have a prompt that's probably writes some stuff. Then they have a
Yeah.
prompt that reviews it. Then they'll have another prompt, and they'll break that whole blog post into a series of prompts to get you to a blog. Too many people are trying to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to just say, here's my everything into one big prompt, AI, do it. And I'm like, well, would you do that to a student? Writing out a blog post, you'd say, here are the guidelines. Okay, now do that. Now, would you give them some feedback? Yeah. So why wouldn't you do that with AI? Like, why do you think AI should shortcut a process we humans would use? Is kind of the analogy I like to give people. And if you break them into smaller chunks, AI will follow you and improve it step by step and get you a better result.
Right. Because you would, to your point, you would never ask a student or an intern or someone on your team to just like slam out a blog without actually having thought through what is the outline, what are we trying to achieve, et cetera. So yeah, I think that that's a great point. It's like the quality of the prompts and the input in is going to help decipher like the quality out. I often know I've asked maybe an innate question to AI when it's like pausing and you're just waiting and waiting. I'm like,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
I need to start over here, or I need to like refine what I'm doing. So
But
maybe
don't no, so let it wait. So that's a really fun comment,
I
Lucy.
do wait, yeah, but then sometimes I see what's the output, and I'm like, that I clearly wasn't clear here.
Yeah, we're because the reason for that right now we're in this race for reasoning. So you'll
Yeah,
notice the word reasoning is coming up, and what's really happening behind the scenes is all the AI tools are trying to predict or guess better what you're asking, doing a whole bunch of sub questions behind it to get more data to answer what you want to do, right? So the reasoning model is very interesting. And what's also fascinating is they're all fighting for, well, how much computing power do I give you because it's expensive, right? So I'm looking at mine right now. It said 1 minute and 2 seconds, right? Feels like a long time, right? But I would rather have a good result than a fast result, right? So we're going to find this balance between having to be patient
Right.
and then still get maybe the wrong thing and be like, yeah, I thought about it for a long time, but I went the wrong direction. That's
Right.
okay, right? But it's fascinating. The chase for reasoning models is definitely exciting. It's an exciting new technology that's
Yeah.
changing everything for us.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So maybe final question for you is just like guidance for marketers of like how do they make sure that they're improving their prompt quality over time?
Yeah, and it's funny that you know me, I sometimes feel like I'm a professor going back where you nitpick words, right? So what's
Yeah.
good? What's quality? One of my favorite things is if you got a result you like with, then it's good enough, right? Now, some people say, well, what happens if someone's doing something better than me? I'm like, well, if they know what's better than you, then you need to learn what's better. So it's not the prompt issue. It's do you know what good is? Do you know what better is? Do you know what else is capable? That to me is the human learning to get better versus the prompt. But at the end of the day, any prompt that gets you what you want, I call it a good prompt. Um, and you know what's I find fascinating about, especially for marketing, is that we like if you think about coding, it's pretty obvious. Code works, code does not work. You know, you run code, it breaks, it's pretty obvious. With marketing, you and me could write different emails, different ads, different copy, different landing pages, different positioning statements. And is yours better than mine? Based on what guideline, right? But the one thing I will ask people to do is there are people in a team that have best practices and best knowledge practices. If those are inside the prompt, then I know that team is pushing the right direction.
Mhm.
Right? So if I go to a group and I see a whole bunch of prompts that just talk about things generically, like, write me a blog post that's 500 words that's SEO optimized, you can tell there's not a lot of thought leader. And this is where it gets a little bit uncomfortable when you talk about, Lucy, those junior marketers, is that they don't know yet what they should include.
Right.
How long, how many headings, do I include the keyword in 3 out of the 5 headings? How many links I should do? Like there has to be some guidelines, and so they have to start to develop that skill or ask someone who's more senior than them to give them guidelines of what good is for your organization. But you're going to find if I took prompts from your last organization, Lucy, and take them to the next one, there'll definitely be overlap, like 80%. But it's like the classic 80-20 rule. That 20% difference is what makes that organization different than your organization, right? We all need blogs, but how do you
Right.
do blogs? What kind of blogs?
Right.
Are you doing cheeky blogs? Do you like to have a special opening at the blog? Do you like to do a TLDR at the blog? Do you like, so many different things you could do with your blog? Well, what's in your prompt to guide AI that? I sometimes feel like sometimes when I answer these questions, it's not like I'm trying to avoid it. It's just like I'm just trying to reframe how we think around it
Yeah.
because it's just hard to answer like here's what's a good prompt. But I'll say this about also prompting. We have to recognize now is we're going to be prompting for web, so search. So how we prompt for search is going to shift. We're prompting for getting something out of AI. So when we're in a large language, we're going to prompt for that, and then we're going to start to prompt for agents. And
Mhm.
agent prompting is very different than that middle ground prompting because for agents, it doesn't have the interactive cycles. It's supposed to go off and run once or maybe work with another agent. So for those now, you have to get much more clear on what's the objective, what's a good outcome, what should you not do, and stuff like that. Because as we talk about the evolution of AI moves, the telling AI what not to do almost comes more critical than telling it what to do.
Mhm.
We're going to ask AI to figure out things more for us, but also be more focused on the guardrails.
Right.
So I see a future where we're going to say, hey, write an SEO blog post. And instead of saying it has to be like this, it's going to be like, you write it, but don't do these things. And you figure out in between, which is a
Yeah.
very uncomfortable truth to people because as AI gets smarter, that's kind of where this tech is gonna lead us naturally.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I feel like we could go deeper on that in a future conversation. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for the time today.
Likewise, it was fun, Lucy. We'll talk to you.